Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us from across the world. Thank you for joining our session at the Data Cloud Summit hosted by Google Cloud. We are presenting on behalf of SADA, a premier Google Cloud partner, and we are excited to talk to you about the way that SADA views data on Google Cloud. And to start off, I'd like to briefly introduce ourselves. I will be your first speaker. My name is Brian Sook. I am based out of New York City, and I am a senior solutions architect in our data engineering group, reporting out of our office of the CTO. And now I'd like to pass it off to Nuno, my co-presenter, to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name is Nuno Luro, and I'm a cloud engineer at SADA, working in the pre-sales engineering department. And my focus is it's a little bit more on the data side, so I'm super happy to be here to join in with the session.
So to start it off, I would like to just take a few minutes and talk to you about the way that SADA looks at data and some of the different trends that we're seeing across both our internal use cases, as well as some of the things that we're seeing in conjunction with Google Cloud and our customers. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is really about metadata. Now, this is not a topic that's new by any means. In fact, metadata management and information and metadata governance is a topic that's as old as data warehousing itself. So this idea about being able to define things such as what a customer is, what a sales represents, or what your numbers really mean on your executive dashboards, making sure that kind of consistency is maintained throughout the different lines of business in your organization is incredibly important. Now, in the age of overnight batch data warehouses, you have a single source of truth in your data warehouse, and all of your data is maintained in that one single store. So it becomes a little bit easier to maintain it since you're only dealing with one data source. One of the interesting things that's happened is the advent of cloud-based data technologies. And so with the increased usage of things such as data lakes, we have data marts popping up everywhere because storage and compute has become so cheap. This means that business units are starting to spin up their own instances of data. Things are becoming fragmented again, and definitions, as one could imagine predictably, are starting to diverge from each other as well. And so this gets us back to this concept of having to get control of your metadata once again. And it becomes incredibly difficult to be able to maintain that when you have data being far flung all across the reaches of your enterprise. And so one of the things that we're seeing is a resurgence of discussion within our customer base about the importance of maintaining metadata across the organization. And so when we're starting to look at different architectures, metadata is no longer an afterthought. So things such as Google Cloud's data catalog, being able to maintain the technical data assets and the metadata behind that, leveraging tools such as Colibra in partnership with Google Cloud, or a number of different vendors such as Informatica, SAP, who also deal with metadata management. These are things that are becoming forefront of the discussion, and it's so important in this day and age of cloud data to make sure that you have that as a solid foundation. The next thing I would like to talk about is about multi-cloud. So we here at SADA, we love Google Cloud, and we think that it is the best thing since sliced cloud bread. But we do realize that across different customer bases, there are a number of different needs that do oftentimes require companies to build platforms on multiple different public cloud platforms. When it comes to data, this does impose a number of different challenges. So number one, again, is this extension of the previous concept of metadata. So when you have data warehouses and data marts spread across Google Cloud, AWS, and sometimes Azure, how do you maintain a consistent metadata management system across all three? And again, this is when we lean on the openness of the different solutions that we mentioned in the previous slide to help bridge the gap between different cloud platforms and to maintain that single pane of glass across your enterprise's data assets. Another thing to think about that we often talk about is cost control. And so when we start having different disparate sets of data across different public clouds, things such as replication of data, the egress costs that are associated with that when you start to replicate data across clouds starts to become an issue. And so one of the really cool things is starting to look at cloud native technologies to bridge that gap as well, such as BigQuery Omni, which allows you to cross that bridge across different cloud providers and push down that processing so that things such as data replication and data egress is minimized. Another interesting thing that we're talking about with a number of different customers is starting to build these API gateways on top of the different cloud platform data silos. And so this way, when we start to look at data architectures from a services oriented standpoint, being able to maintain a consistent set of APIs so that no matter where your data lives, as long as things such as definitions and schemas are well maintained, you now have a common talking communication point that is well understood across the enterprise so that data interchange across your lines of businesses becomes very, very easy. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon is this idea of cloud-driven architectures that are also driven by sustainable footprints. Now, sustainability is a topic that is increasingly becoming important across both our customer base as well as within SADA and Google Cloud as well. When we talk to a lot of our different enterprise customers, the concept of trying to minimize the footprint of your carbon footprint and trying to make it so that we are as close to carbon neutral as possible is now starting to get to the forefront of IT decision makers and business decision makers' minds. Now, what's really cool about Google Cloud is that there are a number of different press releases and blog posts on this topic, but they are going to net carbon neutral data footprints, and they are working towards the mission to get to fully renewable power consumption for all their data centers so that there's truly a renewable footprint on there. Now, in addition to that, one of the cool things that's been happening is they are releasing their carbon footprint numbers for their energy consumption across data centers. So one of the things that we're exploring is looking at different workloads, such as batch overnight workloads, things that are less region dependent, and looking at those kinds of numbers to see how we can dynamically shift according to how the carbon footprint shifts to make sure that when we have non-time critical workloads, how that kind of workload can be pushed to the appropriate data center with a small carbon footprint. And so this is just the beginning of that journey, but it starts to make us look at architecture decisions a little bit differently when we include into the mix, in addition to network latency, where customers are, where different things cost differently, and when we start putting carbon footprints as a key decision metric, that really makes us look at the design criteria a lot different than we're used to. And so we're excited to partner with Google and our customers on this front. And this is just the beginning, and we're really excited to see where this goes. So those are just a few different things that we're seeing at high-level trend levels across our customer base, as well as what we're discussing internally. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Nuno to talk about what we're seeing directly with customers.
Thanks, Brian. So thank you again for having me here today, guys. I wanted to just take a little bit of time to talk to you about a customer that we've been working with and some of the challenges that they've had and how we've solved them. So this particular customer works in the content and software space, and they were essentially having some issues with centralizing some of their data within their data warehouse for analytics. So the customer had a NoSQL data store that they were using for their operational data store, and they wanted to pull that data down and land it into BigQuery for analysis purposes. They were having intermittent issues with loading that data up. So they had developed an in-house solution that was pulling that data out of the NoSQL data store and then transitioning it over into BigQuery. It was breaking on them almost on a daily basis. So the customer was really looking for us to make a more resilient pipeline. And this was really causing them a couple of issues. One, it was really reducing their ability to get from data to insight. So that time to insight metric that we all know and love, and we're all trying to kind of optimize to. And obviously they wanted to standardize around a single source of truth. So with some of those challenges and their pipelines, bringing data into their analytical warehouse, they were essentially building new processes on top of their operational database, which was then obviously kind of snowballing and creating a much bigger issue when they were trying to essentially leverage some of those data sources for their analytics. So they were getting data from their operational data warehouse, which was as up to date as possible because that's where they were syncing some of that data from their applications. And then they were also pulling in data from their warehouse, which wasn't being updated in a timely manner. So a couple of things that we did, we went in, we obviously worked with the customer. So the customer is always at the heart of everything that we do. And we were really trying to understand what they were trying to do. So their existing process was really working on a daily basis. And one of the things that they talked a lot about was actually moving from a daily schedule to an hourly schedule. So wanted to kind of increase the frequency with which we were pulling that data down to help them make those decisions. One of the things that we really talked about was essentially looking into the future and not really necessarily only looking at the challenge at hand. So we leverage PubSub and the global distributed messaging platform that it brings to essentially collect all that information and route it to GCS, where we would store it and then load that data up on an hourly basis into BigQuery. Now, that obviously meant that we had to create a CDC process for them because we were only receiving the deltas that were changing from the system. But the one thing I really love about this design pattern is that this actually enables them to move from an hourly processing window to essentially real time whenever they need to make that transition. So while they only really needed an hourly refresh frequency today, if we extract out that GCS landing zone, we can essentially just get PubSub to connect directly into BigQuery and essentially have real-time streaming with very minimal input from the customer. So I really love that story because not only does it solve for the customer's immediate need, but it really sets them up for success into the future. So whenever we engage with customers, that's what we really look to do. Really want to work with them in a partnership and develop those platforms that will help them ensure that they succeed in the coming years. The last thing I really wanted to talk about is just the timeline. So all of this from discovery to implementation to testing to document handover, all of that happened within an 8-week period. So things moved extremely quickly. The customer knew exactly what they needed. We went in, we helped them out. We did some training with them so that they could actually support that system in the future. And then we actually handed over all the source code. They took it and they were able to run with it. It was a fantastic project that I think really illustrates how SADA likes to engage with customers and how we were able to solve not only that immediate need, but also solve for a future need that will, I'm sure, come in due time. So really appreciate you guys joining our session. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. With that, wish you guys all the best and enjoy the rest of the conference.